Hello, my name is Ananya Chaudhuri, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Rohingya crisis. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to Noor. Noor is a 16-year-old Rohingya girl who was raped and impregnated by soldiers of the Myanmar army, and she currently lives in a refugee camp in Bangladesh with her 35-year-old abusive husband. Now, why is this? Well, it's because she was part of what came to be known as the Rohingya refugee crisis. So a little background. The Rohingya are an ethnic group who originate from the Rakhine state of Myanmar, also known as Burma. And as you can see, the intersection between Bangladesh and Rakhine is Cox's Bazar. And that's where the highest concentration of Rohingya refugees are today. So you can ask me, why does this crisis matter? Why do we even need to know about this crisis? Well, it's the fastest growing refugee crisis in the world, according to the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees. It's a transnational crisis, which means that it's not limited to just Myanmar, just Bangladesh, but it involves countries from all over the world, whether it be geopolitically or economically. And it raises very pertinent questions as to why is nationality so rampant? When do international borders matter? How effective are peacekeeping bodies? And these questions are relevant not only to this crisis, but to the world we live in today. So why does this crisis exist? Well, in the pre-independence era, the Rohingya got along quite well with the rest of the Myanmar populace, and it stayed that way from 1948, when they gained independence from the British, all the way up to 1962, when a coup converted the government into a one-party military state. And in the wake of all this political turmoil, a list of human rights violations were conducted against the Rohingya. But the most drastic change, however, came in 1982, when the Citizenship Act was drafted. This act recognized 135 ethnicities in Myanmar, and the Rohingya were not one of them, rendering them stateless essentially because their government no longer recognized them. And tensions rose in 2016 when the Rohingya were blamed for the murder of 9 border police officers, in 2017 when they were blamed again for attacking police outposts. And this prompted a security crackdown where thousands of troops poured into the villages of the Rakhine state and brutally murdered hundreds of thousands of Rohingya, sparking the crisis. So this has various implications as to why is the government unwilling to face this problem head on? Why is it that we're only hearing about this now when this crisis has existed since 1982? Or why is it that even though countries are mandated under international law to provide asylum to those who become refugees, countries like India have refused to provide asylum to the Rohingya? However, the question that I looked at through my project was exploitation through extremism. I analyzed how extremist groups are exploiting this really vulnerable situation in Myanmar by recruiting young and impressionable Rohingya Muslims to support their cause. So that brings me to my research question. To what extent are extremist groups taking advantage of the mass exodus of Rohingya Muslims? So I looked at this in 4 ways. First, the background. So I looked at news reports and books to understand how the crisis was earlier and how it is today. I looked at necessary documents like the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol, which are documents drafted by the United Nations regarding the treatment of refugees. For my analysis, I looked at local news reports from Bangladesh and Myanmar, research papers, and the Myanmar Constitution to see where gaps in our understanding lie. And finally, for solutions, I looked at other research papers, books, and articles to come up with a list of finite, durable solutions that can be applied in the near future. So through my research, I identified 3 contributing factors to this crisis. First is Buddhist extremism. Second is jihadist exploitation. And third is government inaction. So let's look at Buddhist extremism. Now I know Buddhist extremism may sound like a paradox because usually Buddhism is associated with benevolence and with peace. But this is one of the most rampant forms of extremism in Myanmar today. So the Al-Qaeda, this is Ashim Baratu, who was named by Time magazine in 2013 as the face of Buddhist terror. So he's a Buddhist monk who's referred to as the Burmese bin Laden because he launched something known as the 969 movement. The 969 movement was a series of anti-Muslim movements which directed the Muslim minority in Myanmar. And the reason that all of this goes unnoticed by the rest of the world, or even by the Myanmar population, is because Buddhists, and specifically fanatic Buddhists, have a majority not only in the population, but in the parliament as well, which makes it easy for them to pass laws like the Population Control Bill, which restricts the number of children Muslim women in Myanmar can have. So today, a Muslim woman in Myanmar can have 1 child every 3 years. So that automatically makes them lesser in number, a weaker section of society, and more susceptible to attacks such as these. Second is jihadist exploitation. So now this might be the most logical conclusion people jump to, and it's true. So the Al-Qaeda for the Indian subcontinent, or the AQIS, identified Myanmar as a 21st century concentration camp, and they've been training Rohingya refugees in Afghanistan to commit jihad against their own government. The same thing was threatened by ISIS in 2014 because they were enraged about the Myanmar government's inhumane treatment of the Muslim fraternity. And although this hasn't happened yet, considering how rapidly this crisis is moving, this threat is becoming more and more tangible every day. And what's happening in Myanmar is akin to what happened in Syria a couple of years ago. So because of all the bloodshed and the political turmoil in Syria, something as monstrous as ISIS emerged. And if this crisis isn't curbed at the earliest possible time, something as monstrous, or maybe even more monstrous than ISIS, will emerge from this crisis, making the situation more dire than it already is. And finally, government inaction is one of the biggest catalysts to the situation. So Aung San Suu Kyi, who's the state chancellor of Myanmar, has refused to even use the word Rohingya because she doesn't want there to be more bloodshed. Well, that led to global condemnation, and more importantly, it led to extremist anger. The extremist groups were enraged that the Myanmar government doesn't even want to address this problem, let alone find solutions for it. So when we look at the way forward, we have to understand that this situation is very sensitive. It deals with notions of nationality, of religion, of faith. So finding one overarching solution is close to impossible, giving you a pill to fix this problem. What we can do is break it down into small little pieces, look at those pieces individually in hopes that this crisis will resolve itself in the future. So first, we need to abolish harmful policies like the population control bill. So what this will do is act as an equalizer in society. Not only will it reduce the difference between the number of Muslims and the number of Buddhists, but this will make it harder for the fanatic Buddhists in the Myanmar parliament to pass discriminatory bills like the population control bill. Second, we need more pointed and decisive government action. Aung San Suu Kyi refuses to use the word Rohingya because she doesn't want bloodshed. Well, blood has already been shed, and if she doesn't want blood to be shed further, they have to face this problem for what it is. If the Myanmar government continues to take all the solutions given to them under advisement, this situation is never going to go away. Third, we need economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure. So while the United Nations might not be able to provide direct diplomatic pressure, ASEAN, which is the Asian community of countries, most certainly can. And as for economic sanctions, Myanmar's biggest trade partners are India, China, Japan, and Thailand. A coalition of these four countries would apply enough economic pressure on Myanmar to coerce them into taking more rapid and more effective action. And finally, we need improvement in employment and healthcare. So what this will do is improve the overall socioeconomic conditions of the Rohingya. So an increase in employment will lead to an increase in revenue and income in the households. Increase in healthcare will increase life expectancy, decrease mortality rate, and maybe bring down the death toll, which is at a staggering 43,000 people only in Bangladesh. We're not even considering the rest of the Southeast Asian countries or Myanmar itself. So the Rohingya have endured brutality for 56 very long years. 56 years is way too long for one small segment of society to endure this kind of inhuman treatment and this kind of just this disposable situation that they've been put in right now. So it's the responsibility of not only the Myanmar government, but also the global community to come together to fix this problem, whether it be economically, whether it be diplomatically, or whether it just be for a humanitarian cause. So what the Myanmar government does sometimes is justify that they're not technically, legally part of Myanmar, so the Rohingya don't exactly fall under their jurisdiction, and then, I don't know, maybe that acts as a bomb to soothe their conscience that they're not doing anything about it. But what they have to do is wake up and smell the coffee, because that's what's happening right now. Future work, obviously, will include the creation of more durable and more finite solutions, because as long as this crisis still exists, we're not doing our job right. And we need to keep coming up with more solutions and more resolutions that we can apply to try and make the situation go away. So obviously, our goal is to integrate the Rohingya back into society. So, like we all work towards making America great again, can we work on making Myanmar whole again, maybe, sometime? So, finally, I'd like to thank Sergey, my mentor, for all his patient guidance. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for accepting me in this program and giving me all these wonderful resources to work with. Ross, my TA, for helping better the quality of my work. Sarah Gao, my lab partner, not in the lab, just my project partner. You'll hear her next. My friends at RMP and my RC group, thank you so much for your constructive criticism. I really appreciate it. And my parents for all your love and support, and I'm opening up to questions.